Abraham justification stands from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. That is a profound, textually rigorous position, and it gets straight to the distinction between a call to salvation, positional standing before God, and a call to service, the historical execution of God's plan. By anchoring Abraham's justification in Genesis 3:15, you are placing his salvation on the exact same foundation as Adam, Eve, Abel, and Noah, the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, which promised that the seed of the woman would eventually crush the head of the serpent. Let's analyze the narrative from this perspective, because viewing Genesis /12 and 15 as a call to service / covenant administration rather than initial salvation actually resolves several major theological and narrative tensions. 1. The legal ground, the shadow of the promised seed. If Abraham was already justified based on the tracking promise of Genesis 3:15, it means he didn't become a believer in Genesis 12. He was already a believer when God found him in Ur of the Chaldeans, the household of Shem. Genesis traces the line of the promised seed, specifically through Shem, down to Terah and Abraham, Genesis 11:10-26. This was the line preserving the promise of the serpent crusher. The objective reality, Abraham's right standing before God, was already established by his faith in the corporate promise of humanity's ultimate Redeemer, Genesis /3:15. When God speaks to him in chapter 12, God isn't introducing himself to a stranger to save him from damnation. He is commissioning an existing believer for a specific global assignment. 2. Genesis 12 and 15 as a call to service. When we read Genesis /12 and 15 strictly as a call to service and covenant establishment, the language shifts from soteriological, how to be saved, to dispensational / operational, how God is going to use you. The Genesis 12 Commission. In Genesis /12:1-3, God gives Abram a series of imperatives. Go from your country, and I will make of you a great nation. This has all the hallmarks of a theocratic commissioning scene, similar to Moses at the burning bush, Exodus 3, or Isaiah in the throne room, Isaiah 6. Moses and Isaiah were already believers when God commissioned them. The call was to go do a job. For Abraham, that job was to leave his land and become the physical conduit through whom the Genesis /3:15 seed would legally and historically enter the world. The Genesis 15 accounting. If Abraham was already justified, how do we handle Genesis 15:6? And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness, which Paul uses so heavily in Romans 4. From your position, this can be understood as a forensic confirmation of service fidelity, not initial salvation. God had just promised Abraham an heir from his own body to carry on the line. Abraham believed God's specific operational blueprint for how the seed would come. God credited it to him as righteousness, vindicating Abraham's faith as it related to that specific covenant task. James actually uses this exact framework in James 2:21-23. He notes that when Abraham offered Isaac in Genesis 22, decades after chapter 15, the scripture was fulfilled that said, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. In other words, these moments were public historical vindications of a faith that already existed. 3. The structural alignment. This perspective creates a beautifully clean timeline of redemption that eliminates the idea that God restarted salvation mechanics with Abraham. Genesis 3:15. The universal foundation, faith in the coming serpent crusher. Plus arrow Abel offers a faithful sacrifice based on this promise. Plus arrow Noah builds an ark in keeping with this righteousness. plus arrow, Abraham rests in this justification prior to Genesis 12, plus arrow, right greater than Genesis 12, called to service, moved to Canaan, plus arrow, right greater than Genesis 15, covenant ratified, the mechanism of the seed specified by separating the basis of his salvation, Genesis 3:15, from the purpose of his life's work, Genesis 12/15. You show that Abraham wasn't saved by a different promise than the rest of the ancient world. He was saved by the same promise. He was just given a vastly higher level of responsibility and service in bringing that promise to pass.